Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
I'm a huge Dave Chappelle fan. And it's a real quick question, but I don't understand how to reconcile with people who think that you shouldn't be watching that. You shouldn't be. I get all kinds of hate and attacks when I mention something from Chappelle, and half the time they know what I'm talking about, so they watched it too.
And ain't that funny when people are like, "You shouldn't listen to," and then they're like, "But how do you know unless you're listening to it too?"
And as a youth pastor, especially as being in ministry and all that, we get held to a different standard, and I get that. I understand. Sure. How do we smash on the haters when they spew the hate and spew the holier than thou when it comes to, because I think comedy is comedy. And one thing I love about Chappelle, and especially his newest specials, is there's no political correctness. He doesn't care. He's at a point, signed $100 million deal with Netflix so he can say and do whatever he wants. And it's refreshing to me because everyone's so scared of being canceled. Well, he's already been canceled, brought back, so he just doesn't care anymore. And that's, I believe we need to follow that as believers with the gospel. And we need to follow that, you know, if you're going to stone me, you're going to stone me. I'm still going to sneak in Bibles. I'm still going to, you know, we've become so pansified in our faith but we've become so holier than thou in different standards. Like if we had the same militance in our own faith and in our own walk and our own spread of the gospel. And I appreciate your content. I've been watching this whole stream and it's been unbelievable. So thank you so much.
Thank you, bro. There's a couple ways to look at it. So I think like the first question is like, where are our boundaries as Christians, right? Where do we draw the line? I personally can't consume stuff that I feel like glorifies evil and calls evil good and good evil. That's like a personal thing of mine. You guys could look up a video I have on Rapzilla about secular music. Not all secular music glorifies evil, for the record. Secular means without religious affiliation, so I think it's important just to have working definitions, i.e. this smartphone is secular, YouTube is secular, right? So on and so forth. So I think it's important just to know that. I think another verse I think about there's a verse, I think it's in Romans. There are a couple different translations. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. For God's gifts and his call can never be withdrawn. The ESV, for all of our elect standard people, says, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. So what does that mean, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable? I seem to quite simply say that if somebody has a gifting over their life, whether or not they're using it for God, does not take away from the gifting, right? Dave Chappelle has a gifting over his life. He is an amazing communicator. Dare I say he is a communicator that communicators can learn from. There's actually a lot to learn from the way Dave not just uses humor and timing and rhythm and cadence, but the way he makes his points, how his points hit, the timing of his communication. Stand-up comedians, by the way, are communicators. They're preachers to an extent, right? If you will. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a Christian saying, hey, I'm going to examine and pay attention to great communicators, not because I'm endorsing everything they represent, but because I'm simply watching the gifting of God, even though that person may not be walking with Jesus in that time, but the gifting of God manifested in somebody. I think there's something powerful about it. To answer your question, Sonship, I don't know. You said, how do we smash on the people? I don't think we have to smash on anybody. There are certain people that their conscience is weak, according to, I believe it's Romans 14, and they maybe shouldn't consume Dave Chappelle, and they maybe shouldn't consume secular music, and maybe they shouldn't consume certain shows on Netflix because their conscience is weak, because their flesh is weak, because they don't have the self-control. The dangerous part is when we start saying we shouldn't consume X, Y, and Z because it might make somebody else stumble. Right? That whole like, don't let somebody stumble. And that's just a misunderstanding of what it means to cause somebody to stumble. To cause somebody to stumble is to flippantly flaunt your liberty in front of them. Meaning that if somebody comes over to my house, I know they're trying to avoid secular music or secular TV, and I intentionally put on Dave Chappelle, and they're like, bro, I'm doing a fast from Netflix, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's causing somebody to stumble. The same as somebody knowing of my liberty, right? Somebody may know the liberty. I say, hey, I watch Dave Chappelle. I enjoy Dave Chappelle. I think he's one of the greatest communicators of all time. I think he's a brilliant thinker, and I think there's a lot I can learn from him as a communicator. Somebody can say, well, that causes me to stumble. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You know how it doesn't cause you to stumble? Because it says that Jesus' first miracle was he turned water into wine. Not just water into wine, water in some of the best wine they ever had. And we know that not only could that water taste good, we also know that water could get people drunk. Because they said, hey, you know, the bridegroom, usually they put the best wine out first, and then when people have had too much to drink, then they put the cheap wine out. You guys did the opposite. They put Jesus' wine, which was the best wine, out at the end. So Jesus creates water into wine, yet an alcoholic can look at that and say, oh, well, this is causing me to stumble. Jesus turning water into wine caused you to stumble. It says that Jesus, they accused Jesus of being a drunk and a glutton. They knew that Jesus consumed alcohol. Anybody that reads scripture knows that Jesus drinks wine. Right? Not grape juice, wine. Does that mean that's causing you to stumble? No, that doesn't mean that's causing you to stumble. That means you need to not drink alcohol if you shouldn't drink alcohol, if you're not of age, if you come from addiction. I don't drink alcohol. My mother's an alcoholic. She's been sober for a month now or whatever. I cannot fool with alcohol, not because I think it's a sin. It's because it's not wise. It's not good. It's not smart for me to do that. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And I think alcohol, even in some instances, can be beneficial for certain people if they're consuming it, you know, in moderation and they're not getting drunk. But I think it gets really dicey when it comes to these liberty things. And I think it's more about somebody's heart and not being legalistic about it, meaning if they're viewing, not watching Dave Chappelle as making them superior or more righteous. That's not the gospel. That's not helpful, right? And so we have to examine the scriptures, and these are conscience issues and personal conviction issues. And yes, there are personal convictions. Yes, there are things that God will reveal for you to not do in a season. Don't take those personal convictions and hold them on every Christian that's ever walked the earth, because you need to restrain yourself from something for a season of life. And for me, I don't think I'll ever drink alcohol casually, right? I don't think I'll ever do that, right? But I would never look down on my nose to some of my pastors who even drink alcohol casually. So I would put Dave Chappelle in that same category. You need to be discerning. You need to know yourself. You need to know if it's a weakness for you, but you also need to not hold everybody to that standard, because it's not a black and white salvation issue. But that's a good question, man. But yeah, man, I watch Dave Chappelle, and if you are convicted by watching Dave Chappelle, don't watch Dave Chappelle. Don't watch him because I told you to watch him.